Greetings. Welcome to Things They Never Taught You in Church. And this is another episode of the series that we're running on the Four Hidden Dynasties of the Bible. Tonight we will expose the press agent of the Four Hidden Dynasties, which will be used by Satan in the end times to spread his lies and convince people of the entire world that his lies are the truth. In our last episode, we covered the enforcer of the Four Hidden Dynasties, which you will remember is the world scientific community. Along with the enforcer, the dynasty's press agent will push and publicize Antichrist's lies to the world when he arrives here. There's an old saying that's never been true. It wasn't in the past, and it's even less true today than it was way back when. I heard it all the time when I was growing up. It wasn't true then. The saying goes, I saw it on TV, so it must be true. If the world scientific community is the enforcer of the hidden dynasties of education, politics, religion, and the economy, then the world media is its press agent. The same today applies to other medias of communication, folks. They're just the same as TV. They aren't necessarily true. It applies to radio, newspapers you might read, the internet, and all types of social media. Do not believe anything that you see out there until you check it out and prove it for yourself. Let me make one thing clear before we get going on the press agent here. News networks that lean to the right, more conservative-leaning news networks, do the same thing as left-leaning news networks do to a certain degree. They don't cover the negative stories about the right as much as they cover negative stories about the left. Folks, that's only natural. I mean, it happens all the time in everyday life. But I believe the big difference here with the news medias is that over the past few years, there have been so many false, phony, made-up stories about the right, and especially Donald Trump. It's been going on for 4 or 5 years, and many networks now that lean a little conservative don't want to go near those stories because they know 99% of them are fake. There are many examples of how the left-leaning media leaves out the important information of stories that they do cover. One of the biggest stories out there that they're just totally giving fake news about concerns racism and the police in this country. Look, here's the facts of the matter. This is the truth. Every person of color that has been killed by the police over the last year and a half, and then their death has been used to riot and burn down cities across this nation, those people that were shot and killed by the police were breaking the law. Or they were helping them break the law, or they were with them in some way, shape, or form. Folks, that's just the truth. Law-abiding citizens of every race don't seem to have this problem with the police. Now, while the scientific community swears that whatever the hidden dynasties say is true, the world press and media publicizes it in nothing but a positive light and puts roadblocks in the way of all of the opposing views. Or they just refuse to report on it altogether, any dissenting opinions. Where do all of the media professionals in this world come from? This is a serious question that I'd like you to ponder, especially after watching some of our videos on the Four Hidden Dynasties. The talent that we see in the media today, on national programs, night after night, week after week, year after year in some cases, and all of their producers, their writers, the editors, behind the scenes of all these news broadcasts that are peppering this country relentlessly across the world, actually, every day. Where do they come from? Well, of course, they come from the journalism and communication departments of institutions of higher education all around the world. These people that we're trusting to hear our news from have been indoctrinated by the agents of the hidden dynasty of education. The so-called journalists of today have been taught by these institutions of higher education that their job is not to be the watchdog over governments anymore, like they have always been. Journalism students, indoctrinated by the hidden dynasty of education, are now taught in school that they are destined to be the press agent of every radical liberal idea or piece of legislation or political candidate that comes their way. Instead of investigating and holding people accountable, including scientists, by the way, they are trained to act as if they're on a promotion team for whatever or whoever that they're reporting on. I mean, if they agree with them, that is. If they don't agree with them, then it's a whole different story. At every turn, they gloss over any question about or criticism of their liberal idols and heroes. You know, the Hunter Biden case, I'm wondering what you really know about the Hunter Biden case, but it's a perfect example of what we're talking about here. What kind of treatment do you think Hunter Biden would have received if he had been a conservative? Or better than that, friends, what if his last name had been Trump? You know the answer. They would have been all over him relentlessly, day and night and day, like white on rice. Oh, excuse me if I offended you. That might be considered to be racist in certain corners of the world today. Look, the truth is, the media dehumanizes and attacks supporters of any issue or person with whom the liberal establishment disagrees. We will look at the biased press and media and how they promote and protect the political issues and the people that they worship later on in this series. But here tonight, I would like to look at some of the liberal, wacky theories that the press and the media hold sacred. Now, we mentioned in our last episode Dr. Fauci's proclamation of scientific fact and how it changed from month to month and in some cases day to day. But what you really need to understand is how he got away with it. I mean, nobody on the right would have been able to, except for a few conservative news outlets. Fauci's flip-flops all over the place, not only about masks, but about the dangerousness of the China virus in general. And now, more recently, about funding gain-of-function research in Chinese labs controlled by the communist Chinese government have never been reported on or seriously investigated by the mainstream media or press. I ask you, friends, where was the Fourth Estate when supposed experts, medical experts, changed their medical advice and their estimates of the severity of everything about the China virus on almost a daily basis? They were nowhere to be found. I want to remind you of what gain of function research is. It means that these scientists working with different viruses, trying to make them more deadly and infectious to human beings. Folks, these people are trying to develop killer viruses in a Chinese lab. And we, the United States taxpayer, through our tax dollars, is funding it through Anthony Fauci. And we're not told anything about what's going on in the mainstream media. Instead, what we have received from the press agent for the Hidden Dynasties for a long time now was continual proclamations about what you can and you cannot do, or where you could or you could not go, and all of the quote-unquote science backing up all the attacks that we're seeing waged against the Constitution of the United States, friends. I mean, instead of asking questions like the press should ask, the media should ask, like, hey, where do you guys get these powers you're trying to impose on the American people? All we got out of the press was flowery praise and comments on how smart and compassionate these fools are. That's all we got from the press and the media. And what about global warming? You know it's one of my favorite subjects. The facts show, like it or not, that the United States is actually the least polluting of any of the world powers. And yet, the world media tells us over and over again that the people of the United States has to change their ways. Because if we don't, we're going to destroy the world. And they tell us the oceans are rising and the glaciers are melting right before our eyes, and that it's our fault because of what we do and where we live and even what we eat. Only, friends, you know, the truth is the oceans are not rising and the glaciers are not melting any faster than they have been for the last 10,000 years or so. Remember Al Gore? Yeah, I'm sure you remember him. He was vice president of the United States. He ran for president, if I remember right. Well, now, Al Gore is spokesperson for the enforcer, the scientific community. Even though he flunked out of college, and even though he told us like 20 years ago that by now in 2021 there would be no more glaciers. They'd all be melted. And the West Coast and the East Coast, they'd be underwater by now. And still, the press agent for the Hidden Dynasties are promoting him as a world expert on global warming. Friends, it's a joke. You can't take that seriously. Look, there is plenty of evidence out there that the natural process of the earth, the things that it goes through, such as eruptions of volcanoes, produce more pollution than mankind does. In an abstract that was published by the Department of Geography of Hunter College, City University of New York, and this abstract was published back in the fall of 2014. It's almost 7 years ago almost. So it's been out there a while. And it was written by a woman, her name is Sarah George, expert in her field. And we're going to put this up on the screen for you. But I'm going to quote her here. This is a direct quote from Ms. George. Volcanically sourced pollution, that means from volcanoes, also has the potential to release as much carbon dioxide, CO2, dioxide, carbon dioxide, and sulfur dioxide, which is SO2, during a single eruption than 250 years of anthropogenically produced pollution. Now, if you're wondering, like I was wondering, what exactly that anthropogenically means, it means it's caused by people. So in other words, what Ms. George is telling us is that one eruption of a volcano can produce as much pollutants into our atmosphere as humans do in 250 years. And speaking of Al Gore, there's something going on in the world today and it's been going on for a while, believe me. I call it environmental fraud. And there are many, many stories out there about people like Al Gore who fly all over the world in their ultra-polluting private jet airplanes, living in huge, mega-polluting houses, while they're lecturing the rest of us about how we need to be driving electric cars, riding bicycles, how we should stop eating beef, and on and on and on. There are stories all over the place out there about this stuff. Leo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Gwyneth Paltrow, too many to name, can't even pronounce most of their names. They're hypocrites, folks, and they are committing environmental fraud. They're flying around the world in their private jet airplanes, living in their big houses, polluting hundreds, thousands of times more than individuals are, and yet they're telling us what to do to stop the pollution of the world. The little girl from Switzerland, you remember her, or from wherever, I think it was Switzerland. She's a great example. She came over here, if you remember, she was presented to us as sailing across the ocean blue and bringing America a non-pollution message in a way, a non-polluting way. She traveled by a sailboat. That was the big story, and it was supposed to set an example for us. Do you know how she returned home? Some of you might. You probably even guessed it if you haven't heard it. She took planes, trains, and automobiles, folks. I mean, that movie was a comedy. This is as big a comedy as the movie was. And while we're on the subject, the Obamas, you remember the Obamas. Barry and Michelle Obama, he was president, she was first lady for 8 years. Last year, the Obamas bought an $11.75 million beachside property in Martha's Vineyard. And according to the app What's My Elevation, you can check this out, it lists their home Barry and Michelle's home as being 3 feet above sea level, folks. Now, I got to say, there's other sources that say that the property's elevation is actually about 10 feet above sea level, but that doesn't make any difference. It's obvious that the Obamas are not worried about rising sea levels. I mean, I've seen out here in Arizona with a federal raising of the Colorado River back in '83, they raised that river above 10 feet, believe me. And what it would do to the Obama's property if what Al Gore is saying is true, it would be devastating. Friends, it's obvious that the Obamas are not worried about rising sea levels. But the fraud, this environmental fraud, is even worse than that. I mean, we have environmentalists, professionals out there pushing wind power, although it's been proven for years and years that it's about the most ineffective way to produce energy. But worse than that, environmentally, it kills birds by the thousands. Here's these people that present themselves to us as environmentalists trying to protect our planet and protect the wildlife. And these windmills, they kill birds by the thousands, folks. And then on top of that, we've just found out recently that these solar panels that we're putting up all over, they're making solar farms out in the middle of the desert close to me. And the environmental movement, they have a plan to use these solar panels to pave the way of the new Green Deal that they're just so committed to. These solar panels are being made by slave labor in communist China. Folks, the overall plan is you're supposed to feel really ashamed and guilty about everything, including the climate and everything else. According to the press agent of the Hidden Dynasties and the enforcer, by the way, if you do not agree with their narrative, you're dangerous. And you're stupid, friend. And they will brand you as a climate denier. And they're going to shame you in front of whoever is lame enough to listen to them. The science is settled. You hear them screaming it all the time, but it's really not. You know, actually, there are about as many scientists in this world that don't believe in man-made global warming as there are believers. And the number of the non-believers is growing. Now, you're never going to hear that on CNN or NBC or any of the other major over-the-air news networks. This is the important thing about the press and the news media. They don't just agree with liberal notions that we humans are the big problem in this world and that we're causing the rising temperatures. The temperature is rising. We talked about this in the last episode. It has been for 10,000 years, folks. But they promote the idea of man-made global warming. They don't just believe it, they promote it to the world. And then they totally refuse to acknowledge anybody who disagrees with them. You know, a great example of this denial activity of the press agent was a few months ago when some very respected doctors, actually it was in 2020 last year, and these doctors, respected doctors in their field, they disagreed with Dr. Fauci about many of the things that he was coming out on TV and stating were scientific fact. And these doctors held a news conference, I believe it was on the steps of the national Capitol. And they told the truth. They said what they believed. And you know, these doctors, they were banned from Twitter and Facebook. And fake news, fake stories were run all over the lamestream media about how these doctors were nuts and just totally defaming these professionals. And you know what, folks? You know how it turned out? These doctors were absolutely correct. But you're never going to hear that from the Dynasty's press agent, believe me. Now, my opinion, what has happened to the press in this country over the past few years is the epitome of corruption of the world of confusion that we live in. They believe that they are doing the people's work, even though a growing percentage of the public reject them as being unreliable. And the press and the media have become almost as unpopular in this country as our elected officials are. You know, last year, the U.S. Congress public approval rating was 19%, while the media's favorability rating had dropped into the 20s. And right now, it's currently dropping even more. An interesting point is, while the favorability of Congress is about the same when you poll Republicans and Democrats, the media's favorability rating is much, much lower amongst Republicans or conservatives when you compare it to liberals or Democrats. I wonder why that would be. What happened to free speech anyway? The hidden dynasty of education has totally turned against it. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s when I was going to college, education loved and pushed free speech. It was an honored quality that everybody should cherish, and its press agent, the world media, promoted it to the masses. I believe that was because in those days, in the 60s and 70s, free speech was very good for revolutionary ideas. I mean, socialism had been beaten up pretty good in the McCarthy era, and free speech made radical socialistic ideas seem almost mainstream and acceptable to silly little college students going to school back in those days. Hey, I was there. I know what was going on. Now, however, the dynasties, they don't want any conversations taking place whatsoever that don't fit their narrative. So they simply censor anything they disagree with. Totally out of the mainstream media. The enforcer and the press agent have tried very, very hard, and in some cases effectively, to shut down conversation and free speech in this country. And they're trying to shut down our ability to get the truth out throughout the world. It is time, friends, that we stand up and be counted. Turn off the lamestream press and media and find a new place to get your information, folks. They are untrustworthy. As we have watched on-air and cable news networks descend into the disgusting self-serving realm of fake news, other news agencies have emerged to fill the void, take that mainstream position that those guys formerly held. Now, I'm not endorsing any networks or programs. No platforms, no nothing. But you need to check out some of the alternatives that are out there, like Newsmax or ONA, Epic Times. There's a lot of them popping up, and a lot of them are good. What has happened to our free speech which at one time, folks, it was the envy of the world, and it was like a beacon illuminating this country's freedom and liberty to the world. It's become a laughingstock. You have to go overseas to news organizations across the pond to find any real news about America and the mainstream media these days. And I'm afraid the way things are going, that's going to change before long. The press agent of the Hidden Dynasties has taken up the anti-police stance of the left and is pushing for the defunding and dismantling of our police forces across the country. This isn't only disgraceful, but it's about the most dangerous thing that the press and the news media could do. I mean, if you haven't figured this out yet, folks, this is about doing away with your local and state police departments. I'm telling you, they want to have federal police take over everything. The federal police are controlled by these same people in power nationally. And if that ever happens, if this country ever defunds and gets rid of local police, and we have a federal police force only, this country will be controlled by the same political swamp that we've been talking about. And whatever they want will be backed up by their federal police and by the armed forces, by the way. Talking about federal police and what the future may hold, just look at the FBI. Look at how the press agent reports to the public about the FBI's activities. Not just the FBI, we're talking about all of the federal, the CIA, the NSA. It doesn't make any difference, but the FBI is a little more visible. They've been exposed a little bit more. There are so many examples out there today of the FBI's willingness to do the bidding of the swamp. It's staggering. They're willing to break the law at the drop of a hat just because I think they feel protected and there's no way anybody's going to do anything to them. There's no way that there's any prosecution going to be brought against them. Now, it's a matter of public record that the FBI lied to a special federal court in order to obtain warrants for surveillance that would otherwise be illegal in this country. They lied to a federal judge several times. This is documented. And nothing has happened. Oh, one little peon, attorney for, I think it was one of the agencies, he got prosecuted. But the people that were giving him the orders and the folks that are really running the show and are really responsible, nothing. Not held accountable at all. The FBI has had Hunter Biden's laptop, which reportedly contains evidence of illegal activity not only by him, but also by his father, the President of the United States. For over a year they've had it. And the FBI continues to cover up. They won't release anything off of it. Luckily, for the public, for you and I, the laptop was in the legal possession of a person, a pawn shop owner. You can't make this stuff up, folks. And while it was in he actually owned it at the time because nobody came and picked it up. He made copies of everything on there. So we know what's on the laptop. And nobody is denying that what's out there isn't true. But the FBI has done nothing. Or look at Hillary Clinton and her emails. Or maybe the worst. Look at all the powerful people involved with Jeffrey Epstein and his pedophile island. I mean, folks, we know Bill Clinton went down there more than once. It's on the flight logs. And the FBI knows it all. I mean, they have videos of everything. You can count on that. And where are they? They're nowhere. They're out hassling nobodies in the Conservative Party. This is what defunding the local police will look like in every walk of life if we lose this battle, folks. Where this is going, it's pretty bleak. If you want a preview of what might come, just look at Washington, D.C. today. It's a great example. It's fenced off with concertina wire running across the top of the fence. It looks like a war zone. And it's been that way for months. We have National Guard patrolling the fence around the Capitol, and the public, the voters, are not allowed near their elected officials. Worse, all of this, we're paying for it, folks. Every month, we're paying millions of dollars in our tax money to keep the National Guard there protecting that fence. Look at what's gone on this last year. Riots in most of our major cities, an election that more than half of the country believes was illegitimate. Our economy was decimated by shutdowns and regulations that have driven over half of our small businesses out of business. And now our southern border is wide open again, allowing anybody and everybody that wants to come across the border to do so. And nobody is being held accountable for anything. And what do we hear out of the Hidden Dynasties press agent? Oh, everything's okay. Don't worry. We have everything under control. This is the new normal, don't you know? Let me tell you something, folks. There isn't anything about this that is normal. Now, there's several theories out there about why this has been going on for months, that we have our Capitol fenced off. And it all came about after some protesters staged the demonstration at the Capitol. Now, I have my own ideas why this is happening. But we all know, well, maybe we all don't know, but most of us know, that the demonstration at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6th was wrong. It got out of control. Now, there's some different theories about how that actually happened, but it doesn't make any difference how it happened. It was nothing in comparison to the riots that we've been seeing going on across this nation in our biggest cities for like a year and a half. And yet in Washington, D.C., the fences are still there, and they're still being protected by our National Guard, and we're still paying millions of dollars a month in tax money for it to happen. Now, if you're a serious person, I think it's time you ask yourself why. Why is this going on? Personally, I think the swamp knows that we know, and they can't believe that they're getting away with it. I think they also know, chances are, they aren't going to be able to get away with it forever the way that they're doing it, so they're preparing for a worst-case scenario in the future. We're seeing things happen in this country right now that supports the idea that perhaps their time is running out. I don't know. I hope so. A few states have passed legislation that'll protect their upcoming elections, hopefully. We're seeing more and more people speaking out. I hope you start to, about what's going on. And Trump is more popular today than he ever has been, according to some of the national polls. And here, right here in Arizona, as well as breaking news, they're making headway in Georgia with the same election fraud problem, and they're trying to do a legitimate recount of the election that took place in November of 2019. And here in Arizona, I can testify that while the Democrat Party is fighting tooth and nail against any recount going on at all here, the courts are now involved, and we actually might see some truth come out about the election fraud that took place, and also about the Dominion voting machines that were not only used in Arizona, folks, but extensively. I think it was at least 24 or 26 states across the United States that used these Dominion voting machines that allowed people to go in and manipulate things. Hey, only time will tell, but you can be sure of one thing. You will have to go somewhere other than the Hidden Dynasties press agent to hear about any advancements on this voter fraud thing if it does happen. I want to point out some other major stories that are happening right now, but the press agent for the Four Hidden Dynasties, they're refusing to cover these stories, almost anything about it. We've already mentioned the Hunter Biden story, but what's even a bigger story than the president's crack-smoking, womanizing son is Hunter's and his father's connection to China, and how it is obviously affecting the way our government is dealing with the Chinese today. Now, we've already mentioned the press agent's refusal to report on Dr. Fauci's funding of gain-of-function research in the Wuhan lab in China. But they're also refusing to report on Fauci's investments in vaccine research over the years, different patents that have been obtained, and the millions and millions and millions of dollars that are being made off of this virus, and who's even worse, the Hidden Dynasties press agent is refusing to do any investigative reporting on the obvious slipping of President Biden's mental state. I believe the Democrat Party knowingly ran and elected a candidate in Joe Biden they knew was not up to the job of being president of the United States and wouldn't be able to complete the term. Now again, you have to ask yourself why. Why would they do this? Friends, there is no answer to that question that is not unsettling. And yet, the press agent turns a blind eye to the whole thing. The press agent is also not reporting on the southern border of the United States and how it is under siege from illegal immigrants trying to cross the border. And at the same time, how the Mexican cartels are using these immigrants trying to get in the country as a diversion while they smuggle drugs and conduct sex trafficking and smuggle slave labor into this country across our southern border. The Hidden Dynasties press agent is silent about it all, friends. They're also silent about all the rioting that's been going on in the nation in our largest cities. I bet you haven't heard about it in quite a while on the nightly news. I'm guessing because I don't watch it much anymore. But all of these riots, and they're being conducted by Antifa and Black Lives Matter, never mentioned that. The press and the media are ignoring a lot of stories, friends. But maybe the most important story of all that they are not talking about is inflation. We had 3 years of solid growth in our economy, and inflation was flatlined by Trump. Now, in less than a half a year, we're seeing runaway food prices, runaway gas prices. We're even seeing, in some places, gas shortages. And yet, if you're reading the New York Times or you're watching CNN or MSNBC or any of the other lamestream media sources, if that's where you're getting your news, you probably don't know much about anything that's going on. We are going to be talking more about inflation as this series progresses, especially when we get to the hidden dynasty of the economy. Friends, I have been teaching for almost 30 years now that one of the things we as Christian watchmen should be on the lookout for is a force that will take this country down to a third world level. We aren't there yet. It hasn't happened yet. I believe that in order for the one world political system that's described in the books of Daniel and Revelation to come into existence and become a reality in this country, we have to face an economic downturn that'll put this country on the par with the rest of the world. And unless that happens, why would a superpower, a world superpower like the United States, lower itself to join a group of countries that are on a third world level? Even, you have to kind of consider the European Union as being almost third world. If we don't at least get down to their levels, how can a one world political system ever happen? So something has to take place that's going to take this country from its superpower status. I believe it's happening right before our eyes, friends. With all the shutdowns and now inflation is on the rise. Press agent isn't reporting about it at all. And then they also aren't reporting much on the Middle East. There wasn't much to report on the Middle East until recently. We had 4 years of peace and unprecedented agreements between different factions in the Middle East that experts had told us for decades would never be possible. And yet we had 4 years of peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And at the same time, Iran was silenced. Now, in just 6 months, we've returned to a war in the Middle East with rockets being fired at Israel from Hamas and other forces that are supported by Iran. It's incredible. And then there's another story. You don't see the world media rushing to report that John Kerry, the Biden administration's climate envoy, admitted under oath in a congressional hearing that the solar panels that we use to in this country, we have a couple of big solar farms out here in the desert. And more houses are, more and more people are putting them on their houses. But also, these solar panels are going to be used to push the Democrats' socialistic Green New Deal into existence. And here John Kerry testified that they're being made by slave labor in China. And in the same hearing, at the same time, he publicly downplayed China's human rights abuses. John Kerry actually said in this congressional hearing that he did not believe that China's ongoing genocide against an ethnic Muslim minority in China should get in way of the climate deal. Really. All of these stories are being ignored or buried by the Four Hidden Dynasties press agent because they don't fit the narrative. The narrative that's been created by the dynasties and their enforcer. And you got to stick by that narrative or they aren't going to talk about you. Sadly, there are millions and millions of people out there that depend on the mainstream media for their news about what's going on in the world today. And if that's all they're watching, they're totally living in the dark, friends. Now, I want you to imagine, just go along with me for a second, as a Christian, just imagine in the future, somewhere down the road, Antichrist shows up here on earth, claiming to be Savior, to be our Savior, the world's Savior, literally claiming to be God, friends. Question is, what will the world media be reporting to the masses when that happens? Do you have any idea? Well, hopefully you might have a little bit better idea of what they might be saying after tonight. In our next episode, we're going to be examining the second hidden dynasty of politics and what's going on with it and its enforcer and press agent in these dangerous times. It'll be a natural progression right from what we've been talking about here today. Believe me, the hidden dynasty of politics is right in the middle of all this disruption that we see going on in the country today. We're going to examine exactly what they're up to and how it fits into end-time prophecy. Till then, until next time, I hope you join us for our next episode. God bless you, friends. God bless you. God bless your family. Stay in His Word. You know, it's the one thing that you can always count on. It's the only thing you can always count on. And please, if we've helped you, help us try to help others. Share our ministry. That's the biggest thing you can do. Tell people about us. Share us with your friends. You'll be doing God's work. You know, I truly believe that we are smack dab in the middle of the prophecy that's given to us in the book of Revelation in chapter 7. That's where the wrath of God is held back until the servants of God, or the elect, are sealed in their foreheads with God's truth. It's an amazing time to be alive, beloved, and we have work to do. Remember, subscribe to our channels if you will. I don't understand exactly how it all works, but it helps us gain recognition. More people see us, something, I don't know. Like us, Subscribe to us. Check that little bell up there in the right-hand corner on YouTube. Like us on Facebook or whatever or other social platforms that you're on. There's lots of them out there, and they're emerging all the time. I think we're going to be on Rumble pretty soon. Things are changing so fast these days that there's no telling where we're going to be tomorrow. If you haven't done it already, pick up a copy of my book, Angels or Aliens. You can get it anywhere books are sold, and honestly, it's one of the major income streams that we have to finance this program that you're watching right now. And finally, friends, please try to always remember this. The elect will forge the path of the Lord in these end times.